All right, everyone, continuing with chapter 23, and let's now talk about getting paid for your work when it comes time to actually collect and deposit that money into your bank account. The simplest way to protect yourself is to use a written agreement known as a deal memo. It protects you and outlines the details of your work. It's kind of a different take on the contract, if you will. You can kind of use those terms interchangeably, but the deal memo is going to go into greater detail about the circumstances around the particular project. Basically talking about particulars of how the workflow is going to go, what the expectations are, and that sort of thing. A written agreement is your only proof in the event that you need to take legal action to collect any money owed to you, or if your performance is used in a manner that you did not agree to. Make sure you have a signed agreement in hand. This is important. Have the agreement in hand before you begin any work. Do not do any work without a signed agreement, because if you don't have signatures, if you don't have a document in writing, you are not protected, and there's a danger that you could be taken advantage of. Or there's a danger that someone could claim that you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And if they don't have the documentation to back it up, you don't have the documentation to back it up, it becomes a he said, they said, and nobody is going to come out effectively in that one. And again, no documentation means it could wind up in just about any direction. If you want to take a look at a sample deal memo letter, take a look in the textbook. There is a good example there for you. Now, to guarantee that you'll get paid, for many clients, you will need to send an invoice that says payable upon receipt. So it's not, by and large, you shouldn't expect to receive a check the day that you do a recording. More than likely, you're going to have to invoice, because they're going to need the invoice for their financial records. And it's also a good practice for you to keep invoices and help you to be able to keep track of what is owed and what's been paid and that sort of thing. Now, sometimes, depending on the business that you're working with and how their accounting system works, it's possible that you might be waiting up to 90 days to receive a payment. It's not unusual in the business world. That's something that you're going to need to be prepared for. Some ways that you might be able to expedite at least partial payment: you can insist on clients sending a deposit for their talent fee and for studio time to be paid in advance, maybe 50% down, something like that, so it guarantees that you have something in your pocket. Ask your client to make payment through an online payment service if they have a company credit card that they can use to pay you. It's convenient, it can be done rather quickly, and that avoids, sending an invoice in the mail, waiting for them to mail a check back to you, all that sort of thing. It makes things happen a whole lot quicker. You can set up a merchant account for your business so that you can accept credit cards. This is something that kind of takes on a more professional approach. Merchant accounts are generally going to be for businesses that do a large volume of credit card transactions, and depending on the rates that your bank charges for that, may or may not be worthwhile. The other thing you can do is you can deliver a partial project or deliver a project that is watermarked for approval by the client, and then you send a complete clean copy of the project once you've received your payment. Now, there's pros and cons to this. The pro is that you can show good faith that you did the work, and the client can decide if they like it before they send payment to you, so it's a bit of protection that way. But there's also this culture in the industry that some clients take offense to the idea of receiving watermarked content because it shows that you don't trust them to fulfill their end of the agreement. That's a judgment call that you're going to have to make as to whether a client is trustworthy or not. If you believe that they're going to honor the terms of the agreement, you may want to shy away from that. And again, it's a decision that you're going to have to make, but know that there is kind of that stigma out there, especially with the bigger and more prominent media companies that, trust us to do what we say we're going to do. But ultimately, that's your call. Creating a booking agreement form. Now, there's an example of this in your textbook as well. One of the things that you will want to do when you're putting together a booking agreement form, whenever you have the power to do this, the big key takeaway here to make things easy on you if an issue ever gets to the point of litigation is to place the contract jurisdiction in the state where you are doing your work. If you're in North Carolina and you're doing for somebody in California, include in the agreement that the jurisdiction for any sort of legal action is North Carolina. That way, when you have jurisdiction in your state, you can sue somebody without having to hire an attorney in the state or the city where your client is. You can do everything from your side in your area, and it makes things a whole lot easier to deal with. Some other types of agreements, some larger companies like major radio and TV stations will not accept or sign a performer's deal memo or contract. If you want the work, you're going to have to accept their terms, and they're big enough they can do that. However, when you're looking at an agreement that they come up with, you still need to read through it. You still need to ask questions. You still need to do some negotiations in case there's things in there that you simply are confused about or don't agree with. But make sure that you have it in writing, and you can also ask to have that clause included that the contract jurisdiction is in your state. So if you do see something that a client provided contract has that you don't agree with, if you think something's missing, you can always negotiate to have that agreement modified before it is signed. Because again, remember, everything is negotiable up to the point that the signatures get on the document. So just because somebody stuffs a sheet of paper in front of you doesn't necessarily mean you have to take it or leave it. Make sure, don't treat this like a computer software end user agreement where you just kind of skip through the terms and conditions and you click I agree. Read through the contract. Ask questions about it. Make sure you agree with everything and make sure you know what you are signing. When you're working in conditions like this, you'll most likely be asked to provide your Social Security number. They will provide for you to sign what's called a W-9 form. It is a form that contractors fill out when companies pay another company for work, or companies pay an individual that's not their employee for work. It's basically for tax purposes. You sign the document before you can be paid. If you are not offered a copy of it, request one for your records in case there's an issue with payment. Most voiceover professionals will accommodate a certain number of redos, but to avoid this potential problem, you should consider including this contingency in your deal memo or in your booking agreement. So agree that you may be willing to do one retake or two retakes or however many you're willing to do, but you should set a limit on it, because every time that you're called back to fix a problem, The callback session is technically considered a new recording session. So it's up to you to negotiate your fee for that next session, or to provide for this contingency in your original agreement so that they don't call you back 5, 6, 7 times to redo something, or they make changes to the copy or whatever, and you're continually traveling back and forth, or setting aside. You're setting time aside, is what he's trying to say, to do these different cuts and things like that. And especially if the reasons that they're asking for these callbacks is not because you made a flub up somewhere. I mean, if you did something by mistake, you should cover it, and you should do it with a smile on your face. But if it was a technical issue on their side, or they had to rewrite the copy for one reason or another, and that's not something that was caused because of you, then they should be willing to pay you for additional times that you come in to the studio. So make sure you understand and agree on what the conditions are for retakes. Documenting your session. You want to kind of keep a diary or a journal, if you want to call it that. But basically what we're suggesting here is that you use a work order or a session booking form, and there's an example of one in your textbook that you can follow. The basic idea here is that the booking form is to document the time and the processes that comprise the project that you have been hired to complete. You basically list each element of the things that you are doing in fulfillment of the agreement that you made with the client. Almost think of it as an ingredients list for the work that you are doing. If you are doing 3 commercials in a contract, so you would list that you voiced commercial 1. If you have to edit it, you list that you edited commercial 1, how long it took you to do that, the time that you spent in the second recording session, and basically kind of list things out individually so that it shows all the work that you did and the amount of time that you spent on that work. Everything you note in your session booking form should be directly related to an aspect of the project that you're working on, and most of which should be part of your chargeable fees. And when you document your sessions, not only does it show the value that you gave to the client, but it's also going to give you a reliable negotiating tool for future bookings so that you can see how long it takes for you to do something and what all is involved in you completing a particular project. What all do you include in a session booking form? Some ideas in the textbook for you. Check out that list. It's not necessarily a complete list, but it kind of gives you the basis for, what sort of things you can include. And honestly, it's a way for you to check to see what all is involved and what you may be expected to do as part of a recording contract. As an independent business person, whether you have an agent or not, you need to keep complete and accurate records of income and business-related expenses well beyond just what you do for a particular session. So you have to make sure that you're accounting for all of the numbers and all of the financials and keeping up with whether you fulfilled certain things for client A and client B, and did client C pay you on time, and all those sorts of things. You want to keep that information as fresh and as current and as accurate as you possibly can. Keeping records is not just for your tax records, but it also helps you have a way of tracking your career as a professional voiceover performer. Again, it kind of is a diary or a journal of sorts to help you kind of keep track of what you did for this particular client and what particular time of year it was and what all you did for them and all that sort of thing. You want to keep records of your clients that you've worked for, what you did for them, and when you did it. And when you get called by a producer that you worked for last year, you can avoid undercharging by checking your files to see what your fee was last time. You can also use these records for future promotion and for reminder mailings. If you are involved in doing work for Lowe's or for Home Depot every spring as they start talking about freshening up the yard, spring has sprung, get out there and do some gardening, and you're involved in that project, as you get into the winter months, you can start contacting those companies and say, hey, just checking in, what's happening this spring? Do you need my services again? You have the records of what you charged them last time. Use that as a basis for your negotiation this coming year. It's a great way to kind of stay organized and make sure that you're treating everybody fairly while you're also looking at what you did and making sure that you're treating yourself fairly as you make future agreements. To further establish legitimacy for your business, you may want to obtain a business license in your city, and you eventually may want to incorporate. And we talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on in terms of things that you may need to consider in that regard. As far as what to keep records of, and certain things that you would include on an expense report, there's good examples in your textbook that you ought to take a look at. As far as your banking goes, and this is good advice for any kind of business, whether it's voice acting or otherwise. If you're going to accept credit cards, you have a couple of options. We talked earlier about a merchant account that you would set up with your bank. They basically are for companies that take a lot of credit card payments. They're going to have monthly fees, minimum transactions that are involved in that. Another option is to use an online merchant service like PayPal or Square. And those sorts of services generally charge only a per fee transaction. It may be a percentage of the amount that is charged to the credit card plus a very nominal transaction fee. So typically 2.5% to 3% of the transaction amount plus maybe another 30 to 50 cents or something like that. So there's not a monthly service charge associated with that. It's much more convenient for those that don't accept as many credit card payments as a larger company. One thing to watch out for is that you want to make sure that it is a reputable, secure online merchant service. And make sure that these services are secure and that they provide protections for your money. Some of the different consumer money transfer apps like Zelle and Cash App don't provide those sorts of protections. And they've been in the news recently about people that have lost a lot of money because their information was compromised on those apps, and they wipe out people's checking accounts, and there's no recourse for them to protect their money whenever those things happen. So you want to avoid using services like that and only use services that have a certain insurance of the way that they handle your funds and do things in a secure manner. You may want to set up a business checking account that is completely separate from your personal checking and savings. That's what the author says. I say absolutely have a separate checking account. Never mix your personal finances with your business finances, because it just creates a whole lot of mess when you're trying to keep track of what you do for the sake of the business as opposed to what you do for yourself. And if those things are not crystal clear and the IRS winds up having questions for you, then they can go after your personal assets as well as your business assets. Always, always, always have a separate account for your business from your personal. And if you use accounting or money management software on your computer, which I would suggest you do, even if you do use an accountant, you'll be able to keep all the financial aspects of your business in one place and simplify your tax preparation. There's several services out there that offer limited features for a free or very cost-effective basis, whether you use different types of online programs or if you decide to have computer software on your computer locally that you keep track of those sorts of things. Make sure that you have a safe and organized way to keep track of your income and your outgo. Now, as we finish up this chapter, there is a link in your notes to an article called Shedding Light on the Dark Side of Voiceover, and it talks a lot about some of the legal implications that you may want to consider when starting a business. And those are things that, don't take it as legal advice, but they're things that you do want to consider when you are working for yourself, and ways to protect yourself and to do things on the up and up. Now, here in North Carolina, if you're setting up a business entity, basically, if you're not running your business as your name, then there is a way for you to do that, and that's basically by registering your business at your local county courthouse. Now, if you decide that you want to go into further protections and set up a limited liability corporation or an LLC, that is something that you would register with the North Carolina Secretary of State to do. And there's additional fees on doing that on top of registering with your county courthouse. One thing that I would recommend that anybody doing business for the first time especially, and doesn't really necessarily have a lot of business savvy, is to take advantage of certain programs from organizations like the Small Business Administration or SCORE, which are organizations that help small businesses get established and make sure that they're considering certain protections. CCCC's Small Business Center is a great resource as well, and they're actually in tune with some of those different organizations, and CCCC offers those services in all three of the service areas of the college, in Chatham, in Lee, and in Harnett counties. There's links to all these things in your notes. I would encourage you to take a look at them and, just maybe think about whether going into business for yourself is good for you, and if you do, some of the things to consider. There's a lot of freedom in working for yourself, but there's also a good deal of responsibility, and you want to make sure that you're doing things legally and ethically by the law standards, as well as doing right by your clients. So there you go. There's the notes for chapter 23, and you know what to do at this point. Make sure you fill out those notes and study questions, and check out all the things on Blackboard. Be prepared to discuss things in class when we get together. Bring your questions and comments and concerns, and we'll have a great time getting into the nitty-gritty of earning some money doing voiceover.